Production funding for Ruckus has been provided by gifts from Dave and Jamie Cummings, the Fred and Lou Hartwig family, Peter and Barbara Gattermeyer, the Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, John H. Mize, and Bank of America N.A. co-trustees, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Ruckus, our weekly food for thought fight over the news of the day and the trends of the times. I'm Mike Shannon. The Ruckettes join me shortly, and our topics this week: a street fight over a name. Rather than fight, Troy Schulte retires, and Democrats try again to retire President Trump, plus roast and toast. Well, we're going to start with our Newsmaker segment and welcome two guests from two groups hoping to make life better, safer, and more productive in Kansas City. Our guests are Classy Alcine, president of KC Common Good, and Alana Mueller, director of community development at American Public Square. Ladies, welcome to Ruckus. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks for having us.
I'm going to start with you, Classy. I've been reading articles about KC Common Good, saw some videos, listened to some audio sound bites. It's quite involved. Is there a way you can simplify it for us and tell us in a couple of sentences the purpose of KC Common Good?
So the purpose is that the organization convenes people in organizations in order to address the root causes of violence and create an environment where all people can live safely, securely, and have access to real opportunities here in the metropolitan area.
So violence is the main concern?
Well, it really is about the space of violence and root causes, which can range anywhere from the domestic space to violence against kids to suicides that are happening. We know here in the greater Kansas City area that many of our school districts have started off the year with having students who have committed suicide. And so we have to do more in this space where people are feeling so hopeless. We have to increase hope and opportunity for all.
Now, Lana, you represent American Public Square, and I know the two organizations are related, but before we talk about the relationship, remind us what your group does.
Sure, I'd be delighted to. American Public Square is a not-for-profit organization that's been in the Kansas City area for about 5 years. And what we do is we bring together non-like-minded people to have civil, fact-based conversations about tough topics. We have many of those today.
Now, what is the connection between American Public Square and KC Common Good?
Sure. About 2 years ago, we were approached by a local philanthropist, Terry Dunn, who thought that American Public Square had a particular approach to addressing issues that might help to address what he called an existential problem in the Kansas City area, which was too much violence. From Terry's perspective, he said too many people are dying, whether that be, as Classy described, by homicide, suicide, domestic violence, violence against children. And he thought that perhaps American Public Square could begin to bring together our more than 2 million citizens in this community to have a conversation about how can we begin to care and empathize with one another and really have a responsibility for taking care of one
Classy,
another.
I assume both of the Dunn family, Terry and his wife Peggy, the mayor of Leawood, both are playing a major role in the development of KC Common Good.
Absolutely. It's a crucial time, I think, for the area. And this morning, I was looking at the Kansas City Police Department report on the homicides. We're at 112. And so in any way that we can create more access, provide more heft to the organizations doing great work, and connect them to the people that need them, we're moving in the right direction. And KC Common Good is about societal change. And to make that happen, you have to have someone who wants to put their hand up and say, okay, can we convene these different groups, get them to work together? And that's where a lot of the
That's the commonality, right?
Yeah.
Your experience in convening groups.
Yeah, we believe that by convening the people and organizations already doing this great work, we can provide more heft for them. Truthfully, we don't want to create anything new if we can help it. What we want to do is we want to bring more presence for the organizations already doing this important job of caring for one another.
Classy, how do you measure the effect of KC Common Good?
Well, we're going to have different metrics. A couple of places that we have looked at, or a couple areas. It could be by reducing violent crime in certain zip codes, but it really could range around our community resources portal, which will be an online space where folks can use to go online. They can call into a number. We have a partnership with United Way 211. Our goal is to build a relationship with different library systems where people can actually walk in and get the resources that they need. So in that way, we will measure by how many people are using them, calling the hotline, along with how many page views we get on our portal itself. And the more of that, we should see more of measurable outcomes.
Give me the website for your organization.
It is kccommongood.org.
And Alana, what's coming up? What meetings are scheduled?
Well, we actually have 2 events at American Public Square that will be co-hosted by KC Common Good. The first will be on October 24th. We'll address the topic of affordable housing and the idea of what are the costs associated with that. I think there's no disagreement that we need to provide more affordable housing in this community, but the question is, how do we make that happen in a realistic way?
Thanks to both of you for coming
you.
in. Appreciate your involvement. Good luck with the organization. Hope things go well, and perhaps you'll come back and see us again and give us an update on how things are progressing.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. That is Classy Elsine with KC Common Good and Alana Mueller with American Public Square. Now let's meet the panel and start a ruckus. Dustin Morris is with the Singularis Group. Gwen Grant is president and CEO of the Urban League in Kansas City. Chris Reeves is a Kansas representative on the Democratic National Committee. And attorney Laura McConwell is a former mayor of Mission, Kansas. Thanks to all of you for coming in. It's good to see you. I don't think this group has ever been together as a foursome before. So we'll hope for the best. See what happens. It seems we are never far from an election in Kansas City, Missouri. And come November, there will be another one. Probably what will be the most interesting issue on a sparse ballot is this: should the name of the Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, until recently the Paseo Boulevard, be changed back to the Paseo? As you'll recall, the City Council, not the current one, its predecessor, bowed to pressure and instituted the name change. Then a group of unhappy residents mounted a petition drive that put the question on the November ballot. So Gwen, which side are you on, and which side do you think will win? I bet it's the side you're on.
Of course. So I oppose the petition for a number of reasons. First of all, I don't believe we want to be, to have the ignominious distinction of being the only city in the country to tear down a memorial to Dr. Martin Luther King.
And that was the catalyst for the change, the need for some sort of a memorial.
Yes, we were not, right. We didn't have one. Now we do. And so now we want to be known as the city that took the memorial to Dr. King down. Should be a non-starter for the electorate. That's not, that's not how we want to be known across this country. The repercussions could be huge relative to, first of all, just our national image. Secondly, tourism and convention business. It's just not a good thing for Kansas City. To the issue of process, as the neighbors say, the people who live on the boulevard, claim there was no process, but in fact there was. There was a task force that was appointed to explore the best names or the best way to honor Dr. King, and the Paseo Boulevard was among 3 recommendations that was passed on to the City Council. So, I think that it would, the ship has sailed, the signs are up, and we need to stay the course.
Does this controversy transcend racial lines?
Well,
I think it does. I don't think it does.
I think it transcends racial lines, but I think you cannot avoid the racial implications in that Dr. King was a civil rights leader, and when we tear those signs down, it will have racial implications for the city.
Laura, do you think City Council should have put this question to a public vote before making the change? Apparently, a group of clergymen who wanted the name changed from Paseo to King are the ones who pushed the council to make the change.
Well, when I was mayor, I never liked having a vote and then voting to change the vote that the council just had. I don't think that's necessarily good public policy, but I do think if you're going to make a change and I think honoring Dr. King is a great thing to do. There should have been probably more community engagement to begin with, so that there wasn't a surprise with some of the neighbors that lived along the Paseo that they were, putting up the signs. I mean, the neighborhood was really upset about when Paseo High School, what happened, its demise. And so I think that love and sharing and discussion needs to be, I think those neighbors needed to be engaged, but I don't think there should be a vote.
Now, Chris,
No, and they were-
Chris, if Gwen is wrong, and I understand that's unlikely,
That seldom
but
happens.
if she should be incorrect and voters approve switching back to Paseo, what might the city do to honor Dr. King's memory?
I think one of the things that we get wrong sometimes when we look to put up memorials to Dr. King is that nationally we tend to put them in primarily black communities. And one of the things that was noted in the New York Times is that many realtors are using this almost as a new red line, as a way to depress values in some of those areas, which hurts black homeowners. I think if the voters do this, I think one of the things that we're going to have to think about is that in cities where they have been successful with having a Martin Luther King Drive, and it is an imperative that Kansas City, Missouri honors that, I do believe that revoking this is terrible. But I think it should be in a white or a business community to show the outreach is really
Do you
there.
agree with that?
So I think that what's important is when they chose to name a boulevard or a street
Yeah.
after Dr. King, choosing a boulevard is very important because
They're better
they have
maintained.
specifications and standards and they are better maintained.
So, Dustin, why was Paseo selected as the street to have its name changed?
I couldn't tell you, but it certainly seems that the city
Because
council.
it's a major boulevard, as Gwen just said.
It is, but the city
And there's a large African-American population
Yes.
would that be the right answer?
That would be the right answer.
Thank you, Dustin. Gwen, you're head of the Urban League in Kansas City, and annually the Urban League in Kansas City issues a State of Black Kansas City report. I hold a copy
Periodically,
in my
not
hands.
annually. I
Well,
think the last time.
occasionally, as I said,
Occasionally
from
is a
time to
good word.
time, the Urban League releases this kind of a document. It was last week. What were some of the top stories from it?
So the report focuses on the status of African Americans in the greater Kansas City area in education, health, economics, social justice, and civic engagement. And basically we're looking at how much progress we've made in those key areas. I think some of the most compelling findings were in the areas of education, which the book is titled Urban Education, Still Separate and Unequal. So it takes a deep dive into student achievement issues as well as the persistent segregation of public schools. We look at that. And then we look at economic indicators. So one of the most startling economic indicators is that median net worth for African Americans is less than 10% of median net worth for whites.
Overall, just quickly, better or worse than the year before, the time before?
So it's kind of static, better in some areas and worse in others.
Was the Kaufman School having an impact?
No, not in the overall numbers as we look at the data and the way that we study it. I think that question is not something that we measured.
I'd like to continue, but we got to move on.
Sorry.
Students in public administration schools know the name L.P. Perry Cookingham, the man for whom the road at the airport is named. Cookingham became the city manager of Kansas City in the early 1940s after the corrupt Pendergast era, and is given credit for instituting important changes and presiding over a period of growth and improvement. Called the Dean of City Managers, Cookingham was nonetheless fired after 19 years on the job. Actually, he was forced to resign, like many after him would be. The current city manager, Troy Schulte, is not being forced to resign, not being fired. He's retiring after a decade in the manager's office. He may have sensed that a new mayor and a council with 6 freshman members might be interested in change. In Kansas City's form of government, the manager is of critical importance. As someone with local government experience, what qualities should the city be looking for in Schulte's successor? We'll start with Laura.
Well, they need somebody who can embrace the goals of the mayor, the current mayor, and the council, because the manager basically does the work. He holds everything together. And with Troy, he's done a fantastic job on moving Kansas City forward, particularly after the sort of unsettling years with the conflict between Mayor Funkhauser and his city manager, and so that's what they need.
So, Dustin, do you think the general public understands the power a city manager wields in a city manager form of government?
I think they do understand the importance of the role and that they're kind of the day-to-day manager of the city. I mean, Kansas City's a little different than some of our local cities around where, you know, the mayor's not there full-time. But I don't think this is uncommon for a city manager to leave after a new election. I've met many city managers over the years who have hopped around from city to city to city, and they always tell me it's because of the new mayor that's come in after the election or the new city council. So I don't think we should be surprised that he either sensed or knew that the pink slip was coming.
Gwen, what do you think of Schulte? You watch all this very closely.
So I think everybody's being really nice about the fact that we just, you know, there's a change in leadership, but clearly there was some tension between the city manager and some of the city council members. But when he opted to, you know, say he's not going to seek renewal of his contract, everyone's taking the high road in that. So, but it's not uncommon in these.
Do you think he's been successful? He's been
Absolutely.
a good city manager?
You know, I think he's, for the most part, you know, there are numerous outcomes that you could state in terms of how he's been effective, but I think in recent years, the challenges around basic services and potholes and the trash issue.
You got that $800 million bond issue passed.
Yeah.
Streets still have potholes, but
Well, with a city like Kansas City, Missouri, it's huge. I mean, it's a really big budget, and you have to have a priority and work on your list, and that's what Troy had been doing. And with this mayor, he wants to change up what's at the top of the list. And so I think Troy's been very successful. He's been there 10 years. Oh my gosh, I mean, that's like a lifetime.
he'll have a great pension, won't he? Because he was in the city before serving as city manager, which is a couple $100,000 a year.
Probably, but you know what? They work really hard and they take a lot of grief, so I don't begrudge
Chris,
that.
you think a new manager should come from another city or from within the ranks of like deputy or assistant city managers now employed?
Well, that's really going to be up to the council and, of course, the mayor. But I do think that there's always good in looking outside for fresh ideas, and I think that that's one of the things that we're seeing. I think that we've had a fairly successful run. Nobody bats 1,000, but Troy did very well. And now may be the time to bring in some new ideas to Kansas City for the future.
Tell you a little story about years ago when I went to a city council meeting early in my career as a reporter in Kansas City. The manager and the mayor were enemies, so to speak. And at that city council meeting, the mayor said to the manager, "Now, I'd like for you to do a report on that and have it for me next week at the city council meeting, okay?" And the manager said, "Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor, I'll be happy to do that when you get 6 more votes."
Well,
So the mayor is not other than the titular head of the city, he doesn't run the day-to-day operations.
there
of the
was a
manager.
city administrator in our area that was known to tell the mayor, "I can count the votes," and
Exactly.
he would do what he had the votes for, and he didn't really care what the mayor had to say. But I'm going to say, Troy was there a long time in the city, and this next person may not be a long-time person. It may be short, because there's going to be a lot of change, I think.
In fact, we're going to change topics right now.
Okay.
Kansas U.S. Representative Sharice Davids followed her more experienced Missouri counterpart, Congressman Emanuel Cleaver, late last week, and now is in support of the impeachment of Donald Trump, and that process now underway in the U.S. House. Davids is a first-termer and a Democrat in the 3rd District, which often, but not always, elects Republicans. Davids has been slower than many of her fellow Democrats to take the final step and endorse impeachment, which requires action by the House and then a 2/3 vote to convict in the U.S. Senate. Question now seems to be, how will this play in the 3rd District, especially in Johnson County? Will this please her supporters in both parties or inflame those Republicans who left the GOP to back Davids last year? In other words, does this help or hurt Sharice Davids? And we'll start with Dustin.
I think this is going to hurt her. I mean, this is going to be her first big test as a representative. She's gotten a lot of cover from the media lately with fluff pieces of her going around doing odd jobs and not asking her the hard questions on where she stands on issues. And if her campaign becomes the focal point of should or should we not impeach the president, I think people are going to look elsewhere for a representative, and this could be just a one-term rep.
Doesn't seem to be any shortage of Republicans who have announced they're vying for that job next year. Chris, what's your view? Does this action by Sharice Davids that she backs impeachment, does that help her in the district or hurt her?
Well, I think it's interesting because the person who's really ducking the hard questions is, of course, President Trump, who just before we got on air today stood on the White House lawn and asked China to investigate Biden. I can't imagine if President Obama had stood on the White House lawn and asked a foreign intelligence agency to investigate political opponents. It's outrageous.
Let me restate the question. Does this help or hurt?
I think it
Davids?
hurts. I think it hurts the Republicans who are running.
No, we're talking about Sharice Davids,
I think it's
Democrat.
It's
simple
neutral
answer,
for her.
yes or no,
It's
good or
neutral
bad.
for
Does
her.
it help
It
her?
is great amongst Democrats. It's great amongst independents. And for Republicans, they're going to be divided of how far are they going to support Trump.
I don't know if we're reading the same polls, because it's Democrats that are driving the increase in the support for impeachment. Independents, there's been about 5 polls that have come out nationally. None of them are above 40% for independents who support it. And if you really dig into the numbers, even Democrats admit that they're looking at this as a way to remove Trump from office, not actually investigate the claims.
So in an ISPOS poll that was released this morning by
which
USA Today,
was all done online. So,
sure, but they're showing an increase in support amongst Democrats and independents significantly for impeachment. But more importantly, the real question is, should we have that investigation? Should we at least go the step to find out
The
what's
one of
going on?
Biden or the one of Trump?
The one of Trump.
Should it be one of Biden as well?
Well, in those
Well,
same, in those same
think
polls, people
I
agree
think
that
it's really
it should be
interesting that
looked at.
Trump brings up Biden when his daughter was out recruiting patents in China. His son was in Saudi Arabia getting grants, and they've been
So that
lobbying.
means no, don't
industries.
investigate Biden, just investigate the
I'm
president.
saying if they want to investigate, let's
Gwen,
go.
won't impeachment delay action on things Democrats ran on in 2018, things they were going to change,
what
like
delays action on things
healthcare
that what delays action for Democrats is the Senate, is Mitch McConnell. So Democrats in Congress have been doing their job, have been passing legislation, and it has not been able to get through the Senate. So that's the problem there. With respect to the impeachment issue, I think that another challenge is just around timing. So if Congress is able to move this impeachment inquiry forward with expediency and get the investigation handled prior to the end of the year, I think what will happen in 2020 will be significantly different. I think, but it can also mobilize the base of the Democratic Party in a way that they will show up and vote. And in fact, we did vote. Hillary Clinton won a majority of the electorate in the last election.
Well, but she didn't win a majority of the electoral votes, which is what the Constitution explains is the way to elect a president.
Of course not. But in those key states going forward in 2020, the Democratic base could be motivated to turn that.
So, Laura, how realistic is it to think the Republican-controlled Senate will vote to convict Donald Trump if, in fact, he is impeached by the House, as I think he probably will be?
I think I'm going to quote my law school professor. It depends. I mean, it depends on what they impeach him with. It depends on what the investigation reveals. I mean,
regardless of that, if the House votes articles of impeachment and they go to the Senate, there's a trial overseen by the Chief Justice of the United States. Do you think 2/3 of the Senate will vote to convict, throw out of office the president?
I don't. I think we're spending a lot of money and a lot of emotional energy when both parties need to be focused on what we need to do to move the dial forward with regular Americans.
My emotional energy is gone. Just tired. It's time now for Roast and Toast, where the Ruckettes have 30 seconds each to pretend, defend, or upend. And we start with Laura.
So I'm going to give a shout out to Derek Schmidt. Earlier this week or end of last week, he came out with an Attorney General opinion regarding the Supreme Court's ruling regarding taxing of internet sales. And I toast him because he is consistent on what the legislature authorizes.
He was my guest last week on Ruckus.
That's awesome.
Interview,
There
and
you
he
go.
Spoke kindly of you. Gwen?
I am roasting the Dallas County jury for sentencing Amber Geyer to only 10 years for killing Botham Jean, an unarmed black man, as he sat eating dinner in his home. While I applaud the jury for issuing the correct verdict in finding Geyer guilty of murder, which is uncommon in police brutality, it is unconscionable that they would place such a low value on the life of a young black man. Surely a stiffer sentence of 28 years, 1 year for every year of Botham Jean's life, would have been justified.
Okay, Chris.
My roast is for the continued lack of transparency at JCCC. As they seek a new president, which we discovered last month in their board meeting, they've authorized an outside firm, which was one of the highest bidders. But they haven't done a very good job of updating the public of what's going on. As Trustee Musil said, they expect to spend more than they did on their current president. This could bring the total price tag to about $500,000. The public deserves to know what's going on and to bring in those people. So I hope they show up on October 10th in OCB 100 and participate in the practice.
JCCC, Johnson County Community College. Okay, Dustin.
This week I roast the Olathe Public Schools and other school districts across Kansas who are considering filing lawsuits against Juul and other e-cigarette companies for apparently causing disruptions in their schools. You got to simply ask, what's next? Cell phones, suing the gum companies for all the gum that's stuck underneath desks. This isn't going to go anywhere for them, and it seems like they should just focus on what they're there to do, is educate students.
I'm checking under the desk. and finally, I ran across an item. It's probably apocryphal, but it seemed amusing, at least to me. You may have heard this before. One philosopher asks another, "Do you believe in free will?" And the second philosopher replies, "Of course I do. What choice do I have?" And that is Ruckus for this week. We're back next Thursday at 7. Good session, all of you. Thank you for coming in. Now for the Ruckus and the crew, I'm Mike Shannon saying thanks very much for watching and good night.
Production funding for Ruckus has been provided by gifts from Dave and Jamie Cummings, the Fred and Lou Hartwig family, Peter and Barbara Gattermeyer, the Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, John H. Mize, and Bank of America N.A. co-trustees, and by viewers like you. Thank you.